Patient engagement programs are everywhere, but the industry keeps asking the same two questions. Do they actually work? And how do you keep one alive and valuable for more than a launch cycle? Well, today we're answering both these questions. Welcome to Evidence for Change, the podcast where behavioural science meets the commercial questions that pharma can't afford to leave unanswered. I'm Charles and I'm from Good Clinical, and I'm joined by Jonny Duder, the CEO of Atlantis Health, and Peter Syed, a global patient engagement consultant who led one of the industry's strongest and longest running examples, Bayer SmartSight program, delivered in partnership with Atlantis Health. So Jonny, why don't we get underway? Why don't you give us a quick little intro about what does Atlantis Health do and why this series?
Yeah, great. Thanks, Charles. And yeah, Peter, welcome to Evidence for Change. Great to have you here. Yeah, so Atlantis Health, we develop and deliver patient engagement programs, have been for 25 years. And, what that means is we're trying, the big lofty goal of really putting leading behavioural science in a co-designed environment to try and meet the unmet need of patients, caregivers and clinicians, couple that with technology and a great experience to deliver better outcomes. And it's great to be here today. This is the third podcast and what we think will be a long-term series, a bit like the program Peter's going to talk to us about. And really, it's the format to get into some of these gnarly topics that aren't often discussed. Can programs work? Can they deliver a range of outcomes? How can they be sustained? And we really wanted to get Peter on today because, Peter, working with Peter for a number of years, over a decade actually, and I think what Peter head up was one of the most successful long-term programs, certainly that we not just were participated in and worked with Peter on, but I think has been acknowledged by the industry for over 10 years. And so we think there's some really interesting ingredients and learnings in there that Peter drove, and we wanted to share that experience with everyone. So yeah, thanks, Peter. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Yeah,
so
thanks.
I think,
thanks for joining us.
On that, and now it's Peter's turn to introduce himself.
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me. To both of you. And yes, Jonny, I think I've known you for over 10 years now, so it's been a long relationship. I've spent much of my career inside of pharma really designing patient programs. The first patient program we actually set up in Australia for Bayer, but then I led what we now know as the SmartSight program for Bayer for a number of years, so over 10 years. But I no longer work in pharma specifically in a pharmaceutical company. I actually now work for myself as a patient engagement consultant. So it's good to be on the outside looking in as well. But I'm here, I guess, today because I've seen what generally works and also what quietly fails as well. So, it's great to be able to sit here with you guys today and share that.
Fantastic. Right. So yeah, we're going to, like Jonny mentioned, we're going to get into the weeds here, get into asking some difficult questions of these complex topics. And the two questions we're going to ask today that we alluded to in the intro is, one, do patient engagement programs improve outcomes and deliver value? Those are two important aspects, aren't they? And two, how do you sustain one? So obviously you've got a pharma-sponsored program, you want to get some value out of it, but you also want that program to hang around. So, Peter, why don't we start things off with an honest assessment? Why do so many people think that these patient engagement programs don't work?
I think that's the $50 million question, isn't it? And I think it's often because sometimes they don't. And it's not because people don't engage with them. Patients are generally very interested in programs that can support their journey on a treatment. And it's often because of the way the programs are perceived and treated internally. So too often we see patient programs or patient support programs seen as a nice to have. So often you'll see a lot of pharmaceutical companies will, throw in a patient support program, which can be quite simplistic in its sort of approach. And they're all great, but if they're not tied to actual benefits or what the program's delivering, they're just a bag of goodies, right? I think there's also this there's often poor and superficial design or very limited co-design. And when I talk about co-design, we need to embrace a patient's lived experience. They're the only ones living with this condition, and they can share with us unique insights. So we work with them to rather than build it and they will come, we build it with them so that we have this kind of deliberate behavior change intervention that's built into it. And I think when you design it at the outset with good co-design, you see really good results because it's built with patients in mind. And the other thing, I think that we can't ignore, and Jonny, we've heard this many times, it's that elephant in the room, which is cost. So a lot of people only think of oh my God, it costs a lot of money to run one of these programs. But programs are actually the first thing that's actually cut because they're often seen as a cost center, not as an investment. And this needs time and measurement to show its full potential and its return.
Thank you, Peter. So this isn't a demand problem per se.
No, it's not at all. It's like when support is generally useful and purposeful, patients engage with it. And we've seen that. For over 10 years. The real issue is that many programs don't address the real psychological needs or the behavioral needs and practical barriers, as well as the wider consequences of the condition that actually drive non-persistence. So, and when they're not measured properly, that is another critical factor. So sometimes, and this is where sometimes success goes unnoticed.
Right. Jonny, does that match with what you see on the agency side of things?
Yeah, it does. I think, this journey with Peter was right from the beginning. I think, Peter really understood, it wasn't really a support problem, it was a behavioral problem and an opportunity. And, we worked together and brought in a really strong behavioral framework that was going to make sure that we were going to address, the capability, the beliefs of people, their motivation of the individual that could then drive a better experience and a better outcome. And we could capture that change in behavior. And I think what was interesting about this, which you won't necessarily pick up in the publication, was the second treatment to market, wasn't it, Peter? So it was, and there was actually a very strong number one who had quite a robust program. But I think, Peter, to your story around bag of goodies, that's pretty much what it was. It was a range of different services, but it wasn't a cohesive behavior change service, and it certainly wasn't capturing that behavior change and those outcomes. And what happened was the second treatment to market, Bayer's treatment, actually became the number one, and this program was really a key pillar in that. And because it was very robust, and I think the other piece was that robustness was communicated through to clinicians. And so they saw it as a really essential part of the treatment experience. And Peter did a great job with involving those clinicians in the co-design, them understanding what we were trying to do and the value we were trying to add. And some of those clinicians became really, 10-year advocates, didn't they, Peter?
Absolutely.
They were very strong spokespeople for this program, outwardly at congresses, but also with patients in their clinics. So, yeah.
Can I add something there as well?
Yeah.
I think to your point, Jonny, I think you're absolutely right. We were second to market. It was an intravitreal treatment for age-related macular degeneration. And I think we were new to the ophthalmology space as well. So we were treading very lightly as a company because we didn't really know this market. And so we listened to our clinicians quite heavily, which is what you do, right? You can't talk to competitors, obviously, but what we realized is we actually, I don't know if you remember, Jonny, when we initially launched the program, well, we spent a good year and a half, I think, designing the program. We launched it, but even at the end of the first year, we shifted from what we originally sort of proposed to a full behavioral-based program. So we did some market research on the patients. We listened to what they were telling us because physicians were telling us one thing and patients were telling us something completely different. And this is where the penny dropped and we went, you know what? This is a purely behavioral. This is behavioral. And so we need to address that. And that's, I think, the beauty of this program. We were able to then pivot and, because you need to have some fluidity in these programs as well. They can't be rigid and they can't be a one-stop shop. So this program was tailored. It was really we had all the bells and whistles, but it was solidly based on behavioral science. And that was the critical point.
Yeah. Incredible. So I suppose that was the SmartSight program that you're referring to, Peter, and we can go into a bit more detail about that. But I suppose
absolutely.
From a summary perspective, these things, they don't always work because one, they're executing poorly or they don't have that good co-design that you mentioned. They're not going after the right behaviors. It's perhaps physician engagement as opposed to patient engagement, making sure you're going after the right people, of course. And then there's a commitment long-term to that program, but also measurement, right? Because what I hear in that is that you're feeding back a lot of the results of the program to inform, say, the next iteration or the next evolution of that program to make sure that it's keeping up with what patients are doing, what they need, the support they require, etc.
I think what you mentioned around measurement, I think that's a really important point. But we learned a lot from the market. The market was telling us there were a lot of valuable things the market had provided us access to. And so that's where we're able to then build the program on. So it was one that was supporting patients, but also it became a very commercially viable program as well.
Fantastic. So I mean, you've laid out why programs fail. You've laid out a high level why SmartSight was different. Why don't we get deeper into the distinction between some of these more standard off the shelf, shall we say, solutions and how SmartSight was a cut above. And obviously it was because it lasted so long, one of the longest running programs out there to date. So yeah, I mean, Peter, let's lift the hood and see what's going on.
Yeah. So just before we do that, I think what we sort of had to understand was one of the reasons why it was successful in hindsight was that when you design a program of this nature, right, it's, there's a lot of components. There's a lot of work that goes in the background to pull these things together. And for me, it was never I'm going to just jump in, launch this program, and 6 months later, I'm just going to jump back out. This was a long-term venture. I knew it from day one because if you think about these patients, this is the long-term condition that requires long-term treatment. And just as, you have to invest yourself. You have to throw yourself 100% into this. And so I knew that there was a persistence issue with with these kinds of treatments. And if I just kind of set the scene a little bit, the market, we had data that was available, national available data that told us that patients were non-persistent as early as 3 months on treatment. So after that first treatment, the first 3 months on treatment, which was pretty intensive, patients dropped off. It was pretty high. And the reason for that was because often people get really quite significant visual gains in that first 3 months. And so if I, am losing my vision, I have, 3 or 4 injections, and then all of a sudden I can see again, why do I need to continue on the treatment? So there's this sort of false sense of security that I'm cured and I stop treatment. But then we also saw those who continued, there was a drop off at 12 months and then there was another drop off at 24 months. So our programs really structured around those drop-off points. It made a lot of sense. And so a lot of the program was built around those time points. They were heavily loaded in the first 3 months, the interventions to support that early drop-off, but equally so, it was supported right through that 12 and 24-month program, time points. And we knew that, that the program could support those patients. And we saw a huge impact just from very early on.
Amazing. So what kind of numbers are we talking here, Peter? Is it an increase in percentage of participants adhering to the treatment after 3, 12, 18 months?
Yeah, it was pretty significant actually. We were quite not surprised, but it was kind of the cherry on the top when you could see that these patients, this program was really working, and effectively what it was doing was actually increasing persistence by more than a 20-point uplift. So from 64% to 88% at 24 months. So that was pretty significant, and that equates to like 1 to 2 injections over a 2-year period. From a patient's perspective, they're able to live their life and to maintain their vision, which is, the most important thing.
Absolutely. I mean, I suppose, sorry, Jonny, from the commercial side of things, like you as a pharma company, you want to do right by your patients, but you're a commercial enterprise, right? There needs to be a commercial benefit. Were there any insights there of how effective from a commercial standpoint such a program was?
Well, just that. Now I know I was sitting within the medical department. So, I often got questions from the commercial team about return on investment. And once they could see that this was actually doing what it was set out to do, then everything else followed. And so this was seen as best practice, not only in Australia, but globally. We were, when you actually are able to achieve these kinds of gains, then literally people are throwing money at you to actually, in a good way, to enhance the program offerings, to expand and to look at other ways to support patients. So it was a self-fulfilling prophecy. It really did show significant benefit both commercially and for patients.
Outstanding. And Jonny, where did Atlantis Health fit in all of this?
So, we were lucky enough to be Peter and the Bayer team's partner for 10 years in the design and the delivery. So I think one of the successful ingredients was actually Peter's leadership and champion, and I'm not just saying that because you're on our podcast, Peter, but I genuinely feel that you had, and I think people would see this, would believe that, you had a real passion and it was a long-term commitment to do the best by patients every day. And I have to say too often that's not the case, that you don't have you don't have a long-term champion who's there to really, lead from the front, and not just internally, but out externally with clinicians, with patients, and that carries that understanding through the program evolution. So we work with Peter and the wider Bayer team. So from the behavioral science design, content creation, and then actually delivery through technology and through, we had nurses who were a key part of this, sort of really the navigators in the middle, and then working with Peter on measurement and the publication strategy. So yeah, that was our role, and it was great. And actually, it was, to Peter's point around, did pick up the interest of global at probably halfway through that. I moved up to London, and I think through Peter's connection, Bayer Global said, look, we've seen what Peter's doing and the team and you're doing down in Australia. We want to make sure, we want that design to be made available for the global Bayer teams and the affiliates. So we created essentially a global program design that the Bayer network could roll out across markets, so they could really take the program design into other markets, because it was working, it was proven to be working, and it was sustainable. It was something that Bayer could invest in globally because they knew they were going to deliver a return for patients, clinicians, and the organisation itself. So yeah,
I almost forgot about that, Jonny. There was a lot of work, but I think there was a lot of attention on the program that we ran in Australia. But yeah, we were able to then, as Johnny's mentioned, I got to work with the team in the UK to actually pull that together and put a playbook together so that other countries could leverage the success that we had in Australia. And obviously, different markets have different requirements, so the playbook was flexible enough to adapt to different markets, depending on their governance requirements and legal requirements and local regulations. It was able to sort of adapt to that, and it was hugely successful. I mean, most people heard SmartSight, they knew exactly where it came from, where it started, and what it does.
Fantastic. And if people want to learn more about how to take these programs global, they can go to episode 2 with Matt Cowell, where we talked exactly on this topic about the 60-40 rule, which I think is a nice and easy way of looking at it. But no spoilers. Go and have a look for yourself. That's remarkable. I love it when the work of affiliates down in this part of the world, being Australia and New Zealand, end up providing for the rest of the world. It's a great success story. Talk me through the importance. We talked about measurement earlier as part of the critical aspects of a successful program, or to ensure that your program doesn't fail. But talk to me about measurement in the context of SmartSight. I believe there was some publications that were released on this program as well, which lent to the credibility of the program.
Yeah, look, this was probably, and I say this in the best possible way, it's probably a year out of my life that I will never get back, but it was a good year. It was a fight, wasn't it, Jonny? Really, it was a fight, a fight for good. And what I mean by that, 'cause it's never been like, so what we ran quite an extensive analysis. We had, over 10 years worth of data. So we ran it was around 10 years of data, or no, less than 10 years, but we had a lot of data. We were sitting on all of this data, and historically we weren't really allowed to use that data in any kind of form in a publication, certainly in pharma, and the company that I was working for had quite strict rules around that, and I understood the rationale for it. But we were able to get a special dispensation. I worked with the team, so the medical governance and real world evidence, to actually come up with a pilot to actually allow us to publish data from this program. And this was kind of, this set the ball rolling, and it was the data was too good not to share. And what we were able to publish as a result of that really did the publication actually forces rigor, right? It builds confidence, external credibility, but it makes these programs extremely defensible. So we can defend these programs because we have the data to support it. And so this was a huge success story. This was my first name on a publication. As an author, I was extremely proud of this achievement. And as Jonny said, this is something that I lived and breathed SmartSight for a good 10 years. So it was great to see that come to fruition.
Have there been any Me Too, shall we say, programs that are similar to SmartSight that have popped up since that publication, or even say prior to that?
Jonny, you'd be able to. I don't know.
I mean,
I can't answer that.
I think it came after, but this is the opportunity. I think in the space, it's not done enough. I would say probably 20 to 30% of programs actually have a publication strategy. and probably 15% of them actually get there. And a lot of it's to do what Peter's talking about. It's a battle. You've really got to unify the internal stakeholders, and you've got to set up measurement early. So yeah, it's a missed opportunity in most programs. And so, there certainly wasn't a Me Too in this category. And I don't even think globally there was. And it's because it takes 2 to 3 years for you to actually have an output. So you've got to really commit early. So no, and that's why it's so defendable. If you're thinking really in terms of building competitive and strategic advantage, putting a commercial hat on, that's that you are building a moat when you commit and deliver on a publication. And we'll put the link to the publication in the thread of this podcast, because, it's a page turner, Peter, because not only has it got, your sort of persistence outcomes, but it shows the underlying drivers of behavior. So we had patients who improved perceptions of our control, reduction of medication concerns, managing their underlying condition. It actually talks about that it had a really nice risk stratification model in it too, and how that was very successful in predicting high risk and low risk. And so it had a tailored journey depending on this risk stratification. So there's really, there's lots of good messages in that program about how it was very tailored, very effective, and valued. So a nice mix of qual and quant, and it's a good blueprint for those that are looking to deliver a publication and maybe have an internal reference point to take to their internal stakeholders to say, look, this is what good looks like.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we talked about measurement, credibility, or publications leaning to credibility. Talk to me about what made this program so unique in terms of its longevity. 10 years is a long time. How naturally, I imagine there was competitors coming into the market with new products, or there were changes into the way that clinicians were using the medication. How does one maintain a program for that period of time?
Can I throw something at this? Well, I think, like I said earlier, I never went into it. This wasn't a short-term venture for me, and certainly for Bayer. I championed this program from day one. So I had to fight many a battle with both commercial, with medical, just on why this is important. But they couldn't deny the data, and they couldn't deny. No one could deny the impact this was having on patients. And so once you start seeing those numbers, it's impetus to continue on. I always also took it, when we designed this program, we took a life cycle approach, right? Because we know, products aren't always going to sit at the top of their game, right? So we've got that kind of launch phase, and we go through to maturity. And so I have always had that in mind. But also the way the program was set up with the risk stratification, which was extremely important, and then all the measurement surveys and questionnaires that were delivered throughout the course of the program meant that there was the structure was there for it to continue. And I think that's kind of been a critical part of the program. So the content delivery, the design, it all evolved with the needs of patients. The other thing I mentioned earlier is programs like this, or any program, shouldn't be stagnant. It should be malleable enough to adapt to market changes, but also we learn things as we go along from our patients, and we adapt, and also technology. So we were able to adapt each year based on the need. So we were projecting a year in advance as to what we would be doing next year. So, and that was a critical point. So these programs have longevity then.
Fantastic. And Jonny, obviously, if Atlantis Health was working in lockstep with Peter, how was that from the agency's side?
Just fantastic. We're working with a partner that treats the program in some respects like it's a product, it's a consumer proposition that you need to keep it fresh. And often that it's a strange thing to say, but often that's not the case. But I think, with Peter, he was always thinking about where are these patients going? What are they saying? What do they need? I remember, did a great piece of content around falls prevention. So it's, it is linked to, obviously the condition, but Peter and the team did a really nice job on a specific piece of content around falls prevention, because obviously that's going to be a huge impact on people's lives. It was coming through as a real gap. And the other piece I remember, Peter, was about diet. I remember the conversation, actually, you were saying, look, these patients, often these programs throw sort of kind of aspirational dietary suggestions, meal suggestions, but actually a lot of these patients, cost of living is a real issue. So we need to be providing dietary advice and meals and be speaking their language about the type of life they're living and the budgets and their constraints. And so even at that level, there was a real understanding of where these people were at and what they needed. And every year, those really interesting discussions around how we're going to evolve the content, what other services might we want to add that are going to resonate with this group that they need, but also is going to add value. So I think in summary, it was always evolving and making sure the content felt like it was a consumer proposition, not in some respects, not a patient proposition, right? It's a program you want to be a part of.
Well, I was going to also say, Jonny, to that point, is that all the, when I mentioned, I think I mentioned around the kind of wider consequences of the condition, patients' lives just don't center around or don't revolve around just taking medication. That's once a month or once every 2 months or whatever the frequency is. They live their lives in between that time. And with someone with vision loss or who's undergoing treatment, there are lots of good reasons to support them with lifestyle support, diet, and safety concerns. So you mentioned diet. Apart from the cost of living, there are good reasons why certain food products and leafy greens, for example, they all enhance a person's vision. So we worked really closely with the Macular Diseases Foundation as a critical patient organisation to make sure that we had content that was relevant to this patient group. We know that the risk of falls and hip fractures are really high. We also know the risk of depression in this particular patient group was significantly higher than the general population, as was their carers. And we created a specific carer stream in this program to support carers, because if you're going to an injection every month or every 2 months, you need someone to take you. And there's a huge burden on that caregiver to take you to those appointments. So we created content for supporting the carer as well. So it was a very comprehensive program that really tackled, addressed multiple issues and comorbidities, as well as modifiable risk factors like smoking cessation and all the other comorbidities. The issues that actually prolong sort of vision loss and enhance, the loss of vision.
Yep. Yeah.
So what's the role of healthcare providers in a program, in a patient engagement program such as this, Peter?
Yeah, they're critical, absolutely critical. We couldn't do it without them. And I think the problem, I wouldn't say the problem is so one thing I was going to say, first thing I was going to say is you need a dedicated program owner. So that was my job. And I lived and breathed this program every day. I mean, I was working on this program. I had other responsibilities, but this program was a big chunk of my life. It was probably about 80% of my day-to-day work. So I was able to champion that program, and I would go out with key account managers and sales reps and medicals teams and talk to clinics and practices about the value of this programs, but also, programs are only as good as whether the physicians and the clinic staff are actually promoting it. So we looked at sort of unique enrollment strategies for different clinics, because they all have their own unique, the way they operate, they're quite unique. And so we sort of tapped into those nuances and created enrollment strategies unique to those clinics. We put clinic nurses into practices to support enrollment, but getting healthcare professionals on board, they are your enrollers and they need to be your advocates. And as Jonny mentioned, we had a couple of thought leaders who were, they were like they were spokespeople for SmartSight, and I often went out with a couple of the physicians, and we presented at congresses, and we had the publication, and we spoke about the publication at congresses as well as poster presentation. So it was it needed to work on all fronts, and they were critical in the success of this.
Amazing. And Jonny, from your perspective, what are the key things that the agency can do to support these programs long term?
I think be as close to the patient need, opportunity, and clinician opportunity as someone like Peter is. That's our job. Our job is to really live and breathe their experience and then look for leading new approaches in terms of, behavioral science and intervention design that can create the match, right? That can say, right, I'm hearing this, whether it's, maybe it's mental well-being challenge that they have because they're isolated. There's a new really great intervention that's maybe a single session intervention that's been proven to have huge impact on this cohort. Let's talk to Peter about maybe how can we look to introduce that. Falls prevention, how do we deliver that? Maybe is a really interesting intervention, and almost create these little pockets of innovation within the program and help Peter, design assets within the asset. But it just comes with being close and being as passionate as the partner, and never stopping. And I think that's where you're looking for that good symbiotic relationship where they're not stopping, we're not stopping, and we're taking that energy and enthusiasm internally, but also externally to these clinicians. And I think, it was a really interesting dynamic with these clinicians, because whenever we needed to, we were thinking about evolving the program. I know there were a few occasions where, Peter would say, we'll call them, see what they think. And they were like sort of part of the design team. It was that you felt when you were talking to them, they were really thinking about the program as if it was theirs as much as, theirs and what we were doing. So I do think that kind of energy and passion has a huge benefit of bringing other people in to want to be a part of it. So that's what a good partner should bring.
I was going to say, and Jonny, also to that point, I think they did feel part of it, and I think that's an important consideration. So the way we sold that program, and when I say sold, the way we promoted it, is we needed to understand what the challenges were at a clinic level as well, and that how this program could support them. So the way I used to talk to them, and when I did presentations at a clinic level, they were really busy. Like, these clinics are busy. I've never seen clinics as busy as ophthalmology clinics. They are, there's multiple injections happening. There are lots of staff, orthoptists and nurses. There's, ophthalmologists, and there's a range of people all running around doing things. And there's a patient who sees them for 2 minutes. And so what we wanted to do was to not be in the way in terms of as a program, but complement what they were offering. And so where could we play a role? If patients are dropping off treatment, they're not coming to clinic. And so for us, that was important to get them to keep coming back to clinic for that sort of continuum of care. But also for us, it meant the patients were actually maintaining their vision as well. And so there's a it's a win-win. And so we were partnering with these clinics as almost an extension of their practice. And when they saw them as that, they saw us like as part of their team, which is fantastic. That's what you want.
Yeah, I agree.
Looking at the evolution of the program over those 10 plus years, if you were to put the very first version, the first iteration, next to the final one after that 10 years, or how different were they, and were they distinguishable? Was there a lot of daylight, or were they, iterative?
As in when we first started SmartSight and
correct,
and towards the end, I think from my perspective, I think from a patient's perspective, they would see no difference, because we were rumbling around in the background, making sure these programs worked like clockwork. There were small changes, smaller iterations, but I think the critical part was what we built into that program at the beginning, and that didn't change. That were the mechanics. That was the behavioral engine, you want to say. So that was the thing that was, we were measuring patients at certain time points through that program. They would enter the program, and they would exit the program after 2 years. So a patient would enter a program, get supported for 2 years, because we knew that the data after 2 years was strong for patients that would remain on treatment, because they've actually got a really good understanding of their treatment, their condition, the need for treatment, and why it's important. And so we kind of set them up for success. So I think there were no real, I think probably the only changes towards the end, and I sort of left before the end of the program, just before the end, but it was more just technological changes. It was shifting, adapting to have podcasts and a web page and other digital elements to the program. So just enhancing what we already had, but still the technology was supporting the behavioral mechanism that was built into the program as well. So, yeah, Jonny, I don't know anything else that you can suggest.
It's probably, I think just the trust of what it delivered just builds and builds and builds. I think that was, and then like you said, Peter, it's not necessarily what the patients would experience, but I think the clinic, particularly the clinical environment, the level of trust that they had, that with the treatment came the SmartSight program, and that program delivered. And so if you had patients starting on treatment, you wanted them on that program. It wasn't nice to have. It wasn't a marketing gimmick. It was an essential part of the treatment. And I think that built, and that certainly in the conversations we were having, that evolved and changed over time. But yeah, I think the program itself, there was a lot of busyness, but we were always trying to create a seamless experience that was bringing bringing in new touch points and new, like I say, little tweaks within it. So we might be focusing on the mental side of it. We might be focusing on I know when the diabetic indication came in, right, that there was a lot around the caregiver burden around the logistics was a really big issue, because often they were bringing in a younger patient cohort. They're both working, the caregivers working. How does that happen? How do you really make sure that that does happen? And procedural anxiety was a big issue with that younger demographic. So we had to tweak and evolve particular intervention for that new indication and new content. But that created a new opportunity and a new breath of life. So
yep,
it was cool. After 10 years, we were able to actually say, 10 years supporting patients, a vision for life for 10 years, which was not many times you get to do that. So yeah, it was it was a birthday.
It was.
Turning 10 patient engagement. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think I think the other thing that was really critical, and not everyone gets this opportunity, and I think if you have the opportunity to do it, it's fantastic. But we launched this program with the launch of the product. They were seamless. It was seen as part and parcel of this. Here's the treatment and here's the program. They were joined at the hip. And I think that also was a huge, it was a big plus to have these two that were seen as integral components of each other, I guess.
Yeah. I can sense the passion and the pride that you have in the success of the program, the delivery from this side of the screen, Peter and Jonny. It's quite inspiring, to be honest.
Oh yeah, well done, Peter. It was a real pursuit and a real passion, and it's great to be part of it.
Loved every minute of it. Yeah, it was great.
All right, so looping it back to the two questions that we asked at the beginning of this podcast, why don't we round this out? So Peter, starting with you, can patient engagement programs improve outcomes and deliver commercial return?
Absolutely. When they're designed to change behavior and when they're treated as long-term investments, they will succeed.
Yeah. And Jonny, anything to add from your side?
Yeah, I think if with a long-term view in mind and you measure and you communicate that measurement and that outcome internally and externally, they definitely can succeed and they will be sustained.
Fantastic. And to the second point of how they can create value over the long term, Bayer SmartSight was a great example, 10 plus years. How can you sustain that success over the long term? Peter?
The big E, evolve the program, appoint real ownership, simplify enrollment. So look for enrollment mechanisms that work, engage your healthcare professionals so they're critical, and build strong partnerships with external stakeholders and keep proving value of this program through things like publications and sharing it at congresses and events.
Fantastic. Peter, Jonny, it's been a great discussion. I certainly have learned a lot. I'm sure people with a interest in patient engagement have a lot to learn from you, Peter, and the success of SmartSight that was supported by Atlantis Health. If this challenged your thinking, share it with someone who has an interest, and we'll see you in the next episode of Evidence for Change. Thank you.